Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Danadai, and I'm director of our data science initiative here at TXST. Today, we're continue Big Ideas Week, and we have the good fortune to be joined by Mainak Bardhan at Accenture, who we've had contact with for some time with collaborative activities between Accenture and Texas State. So, Mainak, thanks so much for joining us today.
Provide those services that we're all very reliant on, and how you can use technology. And this is back in what, 2008, 2009. So, obviously technology was around, but I think it wasn't at the pace or scale of what we're seeing today, right? So eventually I transferred to our federal government practice and moved to Washington, D.C. And then about 4.5 years ago, I moved here to San Antonio in Texas and helped lead our Advanced Technology Center here in San Antonio. So here in San Antonio, we have hands-on keyboard focus on implementations of technology solutions for our federal clients. So here I run our applied intelligence practice, which includes all our data science work, visualization, machine learning, and then also all our digital platform work. So those are these platforms that we're hearing a lot more about. So Salesforce, ServiceNow, Pega, Microsoft Dynamics, Appian, and then also help from on a day-to-day basis, some of our major accounts. So in general, right, we are, a large organization. We have 500,000 people worldwide, 10,000 just focus on our federal clients. Our goal, right, and I mentioned a little, our goal is to enhance and enable and really use technology and other things, right? Because technology doesn't solve everything. I like to believe it, but it doesn't solve everything. To use technology to assist with these organizations' missions, right? In the federal government, again, it's what's their mission? How do you better serve the public with, whether it be the Treasury or Homeland Security, of course, but then, even the military, right? How can we use technology to better achieve the mission of that agency?
No, that's really a wide sweeping scope of things. And when you even invited us over at Texas State down to San Antonio, it was really eye opening in many ways. And in a way, I could argue that it's not only enhancing government, but really our government and society broadly is now basically dependent on data science applications that you guys are running and might not be well known to everyone. Could you lay out a little bit of some of the stuff that you'd showed us and how you guys are really making a difference to make things run better for us?
Yeah, obviously it is the federal government, so I'll have to be a little bit cryptic, of course, with some of the things. But in general, right, it's there's a few different areas that I think are really, if you want to say catching steam in the federal government. First is predictive, right? Predictive analytics, right? A lot of our commercial companies and organizations that you and I and everyone on the call today deals with on a daily basis, they're getting into the model of being more predictive and trying to basically see the future, right? So a great example is when you, as a sales organization, you have a working with a sales team, they're able to pretty elaborately see year over year spend, quarter over quarter spend, just in general, right? We're talking about sales data, but you can talk about any data, operational data, how your organization is performing year over year, quarter over quarter, right? And once you see a little bit, I don't know, a blip or maybe a downturn in something, you can kind of dig into it, right? Versus waiting for that quarterly or annual report to say, okay, we had a blip here, we're going to take a look at it now, and you're maybe months later, right? You can real time take a look at that data and say, okay, let's reach out to the customers or the organizations that we support and see what's going on in the market, right? We had one customer that they reached out to an organization that their spend with the agency was a little bit lower. They reached out and the entity was like, oh yeah, we were going to call you. We weren't really happy with the service. you know, we were going to call you, don't worry, promise, right? But we went to one of your competitors or another solution, right? So we were able to work with them. We were able to work with that company and say, hey, you know, understood your you know, your grievance or your issue. How about we do this? And they're like, oh yeah, we'd be interested in that. And now you take a look at it, and it's, you know, they're back in full force, you know, doing business with that agency. So it's so predictive, right? So again, getting ahead of it, trying to make sure that, you know, we're not, you know, waiting for those reports or, you know, things, you know, that are months behind typically. The other area is, you know, using multiple data sets in from different areas that you typically wouldn't, you know, imagine being used, right? So that example about the sales organization, they actually took in market data from like the Dow and the S&P and NASDAQ and said, okay, we understand that this industry or this organization is reducing its spend with us, but let's take a look at the market data, right? What is the market saying how that industry or that company should be faring? And they saw that that company was actually, you know, on the uptick overall, and that's what the market is saying. So analysts and all those kind of things are saying. So then they're like, yeah, this is an issue. Now, if the market data said, yeah, that industry is struggling a little given whatever e-commerce or whatever, let's okay, maybe it's just gonna be that way, right? The other area that we've done is, you know, you take a look at operational data, right? A lot of our agencies and a lot of our customers have plants and things across the country, right? And each of these have SLAs, so service level agreements with each other in different parts of the organization. So as a, you know, HQ or vice president of operations or logistics, you're able to say, hey, you know, this portion of the country or whatever is, or this plant in this portion of the country is struggling. What's going on there? Instead of, you know, getting on the phone and kind of yelling and screaming, let's bring in some other data, right? Maybe some weather data, right? We're seeing some extreme weather, and lately, right, health data, right, has this portion of the country, this plant, been impacted by the pandemic a little bit harder than maybe the rest of the country, even the rest of the state. Okay, understood. So that there's an uptick, and then maybe there was a bad storm. So instead of getting on the phone or sending a nasty email, what's going on with your SLAs? Now we have all this data in one place, able to provide support. So that, you know, in that type of case, we tell the VP, hey, get on the phone or talk to the plant in the nearby areas and see what support you can give them versus saying what's going on, right? So it's a very different conversation that we're able to provide our clients with versus, you know, again, you know, what's going on? Why aren't you doing your job? Versus what help do you need? How can we help you in, you know, achieving those SLAs?
That's an outstanding point as far as how prediction is really making a difference, right? And we're seeing it with the pandemic in that how do health agencies plan given the data are often, you know, 2 weeks old and that's too late? And how do businesses plan given the data are delayed? And you're showing really a vision of the future and how things are changing so fast in this field. I mean, you know, to show examples of success and where we're going here, I mean, how are you guys using data science to do things differently than you even did in 2015 or 2010? What are things that you guys are doing differently with seeing things before they even happen?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we are in the end a business, right? So we are a contract-based business. So from contract to contract, you know, we really only have one resource in the world, and that's our people, right? And you know, how we deploy those folks is exceptionally important, right? And so one thing that we've implemented was kind of an AI, a bot, right? So as you're coming off a contract or your project is ending, you actually, instead of, we have a website and a bunch of data that says, here's all the upcoming things, upcoming roles and things like that. We actually have a bot now that goes out and proactively takes a look at your skill sets, which you've identified as your skill sets, certifications and things like that, and maps it to the different roles and things like that out there. And then proactively sends you an email saying, hey, you know, Alex, I see that you're going to be ending your project in a few months. Here are the roles, you know, that two things, right? Match your skill set, but then also the timing, right? It's not only about the skill set, but you're going to be leaving this project in on 10/1. This one starts in 10/4, so that aligns well, right? Before you had to kind of go out and search for things, and you've probably seen that in a lot of places, right? I mean, I'm sure your Gmail and whatever is pretty flooded with proactive things, and that's I think that's, if we have a theme today, it's going to be, organizations be more proactive versus waiting. And then, we're doing that. That was just one example of us getting ahead of, certain things and trying to be as proactive as possible.
Oh, it's a great example. I mean, especially given that, one of the biggest costs for businesses that's often not well accounted for is transition time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Training new people, bringing them on, identifying where they should best be positioned to be moved into. And yeah, I had noticed this when we had come down. This is really cool development that you guys have brought into the fold. Along those lines, we talked about where Texas State students can fit in, and Accenture and data science more broadly, and it kind of fits into where you guys are pre-identifying roles for them. Tell us a little bit about how you're bringing students in and where Texas State students can fit in, both at Accenture and also with data science more broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's always this notion, and I still don't know the right answer to it, but I have a perspective on it. I'm a New Yorker, so I have a perspective on everything. There's this notion of should you go broad or should you go deep, right? And my initial reaction is a hybrid of that, right? So go broad, get as much exposure as you can. So the programs that you have, the different courses that the students are able to take, even if it directly doesn't align, but if there's an inkling of interest, or it touches maybe something that you learned in high school or in undergrad or something in your previous classes, take a look at it, right? Even if it's not full-fledged, there's so many resources available that Texas State provides their students. I think it's amazing and remarkable. So take a broad approach, but then look for that passion, right? You're going to see that I'm pretty passionate about data and the digital platforms, and then get deep into that, right? But if you don't go broad up front, and you just don't know what you don't know, right? So that's what we tell our folks, right? Whether it be Texas State or different types of folks come into our organization, especially at the entry level or junior levels, the idea is get as much exposure as possible, right? Whether pushing yourself to a technology you've never touched or even heard of, and you and I are gonna be working on things that we can't spell soon, right? Like it's just that's the way technology is going and how quick it is. Get as much exposure to that type of stuff, and then find what you really love and passion. That passion word is very popular these days. So I don't want to overplay it, but the real thing that I do believe about finding that passion is if you have that, just the way we work and the way all organizations are going to, if they haven't already, it's very team-based, right? You're working together with like-minded folks, problem solving. So if you have that a little extra passion, pep in your step, you're excited to get up in the morning and work on this data set or work on this model that you're working on, that's infectious, right? That's honestly just infectious. And, we're on the same team that you're going to get, Mainak's pretty passionate about this. Let me look into it a little bit more. Let me go a little bit above, 2 steps above the daily that I'm able to do. So, to sum up, go broad, get as much exposure to, whether it be courses or programs, hackathons, different things that Texas State and other organizations are putting on, and then see what really speaks to you, again, from your background or from something that you've witnessed in your personal life. See what's and then get deep into that, right? Because then you're going to have that little extra, and that'll kind of, I'd say, propel you or trampoline you to success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one thing that's been really clear as we've been following up over time is both your and Accenture's passion for bringing on students more broadly and finding their strengths and capitalizing on them. You guys have a really innovative internship program that you described to us. Would you mind kind of filling in our audience, because it's a great opportunity for Texas State students and also more broadly to show how data science is really becoming, it's one of the hottest careers always, for the past 5 years, and how this is manifesting in real world.
Yeah, absolutely. In general, the program really is focused on, taking folks, whether it be from Texas State or even, maybe didn't have the opportunity to make the investment and go to a Texas State. So folks that might have gone to a smaller institution or even, just a high school degree. The goal, right, is to, expose folks to real life examples. So give you the training that that might be a little bit overlap a little bit with what you've done in Texas State, but probably a little bit go a little bit deeper. But the other idea is then to give you real world examples, right? So we're actually starting a apprenticeship internship program in a few weeks, and these folks have been trained and have data science certificates and experience. So we're actually going to have them help with some natural language processing scripts, right? Some of the organizations that we work with are requesting that. So we're going to build up a ton of NLPs that we're able to deploy for some of our clients. Now it won't be specific to any client. It'll just be kind of a library. But the other thing that they're going to work on is a Google Analytics kind of hackathon. I think they call everything hackathon these days, but I don't think it's a hackathon. To work with in the Google Analytics platform, where Google provides the data set, and then organizations like ourselves and even nonprofits go out and find insights. In the end, that's what data science and analytics is, right? Taking these huge data sets that we've captured over years and years, and what are we able to find from it? What insights, what actionable things are we able to get from that data? And so we're going to do that in a similar one. One I ran a few years ago, which was really cool, and it's really applicable to here in South Texas, is we worked with SAWS, the Sanitary Water, and determined, got a ton of data from the Edwards Aquifer, right? To see, how to, predict, getting back to predictions and predictive analytics, drought conditions, and taking a look at temperatures and things like that, so they can get ahead of some of these, maybe the restrictions that they put on, you and I for watering our lawn and washing our cars, right? So you don't want to, again, get in a place where you're like, oh crap, it's been that way for a few weeks now. We need to quickly do these restrictions versus, okay, we see this coming in a few weeks or in a month. Let's start easing in the restrictions now, because it's just not going to be, a flip of a switch in those type of situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you're really highlighting how many domains that data science is informing, right? It's, sometimes there's discussion of financial aspects. And I think one thing that you mentioned also, you highlight too, I think many people aren't aware, is with natural language processing, this is actually, in a way, the hottest field, not just for language, but for finance, for industry, because so much of it's with language, you're actually not just hearing what happened before, you have to predict what's coming next, right? And that's hard to do. So if you can do that, you can predict markets, you can predict, energy, the environment, and so on. And along these lines, with your trainees, I think one thing is that, data science is a new field, right? It's not a single field. It's not just mathematics or statistics. It's not computer science. It's also not just any kind of field like environment. It's this hybrid of all three. Where do the backgrounds of your students that you bring in, and when you're having them work on these projects?
Yeah, I think, yeah, exactly, right. This is I would say it's not new from what we're trying to get out of it. How we go about it, the tools that we're able to throw at these data sets are new, right? So you're seeing a lot in the market with Snowflake and Palantir, all those kind of things, right? So the background is, honestly, I'd say it's pretty wide range, right? One of the biggest things that I tell, when I speak to either undergrads or even folks at the high school level, your goal, I'd say, at where a lot of folks are is, is to understand how you best learn, right? Because organizations like us, even Texas State, they're going to give you all the tools and things like that. But how do you best consume that, right? Again, we're going to be working on things in the very near future, a year, 18 months from now, that we can't even pronounce and spell, right? Right. So how do you best learn? So, that math background, that statistics background is, obviously essential at many points, but also I'd say there's a place for, some of my very best developers on my digital platform side are art history majors, or just liberal arts folks. I'm a liberal arts guy, so I'm a little biased there. But because those folks have learned, what works with them, what speaks to them, and then kind of double down on that. Whether it be self-paced learning, where I'm able to go through something on my own pace, maybe hands-on keyboard development, do a little bit project, move back. Or do you need an instructor, kind of, you and I talking and working through a few things? Everyone learns at a different clip and different pace and different methods. So getting a true understanding of that and then leveraging that and really, double downing on that is, I'd say, the critical piece versus the background, or what you learned in, because again, I don't even think I still know. We don't use Palantir per se, but we use a lot of their products, so I don't even know how to spell it, I think so.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's so much about learning on the job, because whatever we were taught whenever we graduated, but when you're teaching people stuff, right? What you teach is different than 5 years ago, and the same for me, right? It's what we're training them in is very different. What are some of the strengths you see? Because we have the same experience at Texas State. If I can put in a plug for us, we have a data science training program with people from all sorts of different backgrounds, whether it's liberal arts, social science, physical sciences like chemistry and biology, and also computer science and math. And what we find is really cool is everyone brings something to the table. They'll learn from each other. So now we have mathematicians who know more about post-traumatic stress disorder than most clinicians. Exactly. Or we have biologists who know more math than many other people. How are you guys seeing this manifest with the strengths that different backgrounds bring to your data science program?
Yeah, it's exactly right? Like you talk about, I'm again a little biased to retail experience because I had quite a few retail jobs growing up. But just given that, right? Not only the industry experience, if you were on the floor of a department store or the PO, the behind the register, you actually understand how that's working. So when you're implementing, when you're designing something, talking to a client who's probably, a lot of our clients are at HQs, right? You're able to bring that perspective. But then the other piece there is, all these different types of experiences that people bring. It's in the end, two things, right? Problem solving, right? We're able to solve different problems. And I think that's across all the, the curriculums and the concentrations that y'all have. The second thing is teams, right? I mentioned it again. Everyone works in a team. I think it's very rare that you have like an individual contributor. You do have that, of course, but I think everyone's really focused on the team environment. So you're able to, take those learnings from whether it be an art history project or a political science paper that you had to do with a few other members of our classmates, are able to take those learnings from a team organization, problem solving perspective and apply that to what you're working on today, right? So I think we're huge on inclusion and diversity. So, and that diversity is not only, different backgrounds, races, and cultures, but it's experiences, right? So having, honestly, I don't think it would be very much fun if I was on a team with, 4 other Boston University students from the New York area. It wouldn't speak to me. So having that ability to, work with a military veteran, and then also someone that's, kind of grown up at the retail side, but then also, someone that's, got a semiconductor engineering background. That is an exceptionally diverse team that you're able to bring some insights and, things to our clients that, you wouldn't be able to do.
That's no, it's such a broad, really broad encompassing field, right? It's not just kind of people running models in the background. It really just affects every domain. And we have actually a couple audience questions that fit directly into this here. One is that what skills have been most useful to you in data science fields and to your team members?
So I definitely so I'll double stamp it. Problem solving, right? So let's unpack that. What does that mean, right? Problem solving to me is taking a look at something and not just looking at like kind of the initial layer of it, what we're talking about at an initial layer, kind of almost peeling the onion, right? Getting an understanding of, okay, the data set or the insight here is, we need to do X. Okay, understood about that. But are there underlying conditions or underlying circumstances, underlying, things going on that are making X appropriate, right? And because if you do that, if you start peeling the onion, and I think I looked it up once, but I think peeling the onion is, I've gotten into more cooking in the quarantine. So I think the idea there is that the center of the onion is the most tasty or the most, thing. So that's why, those outer layers sure provide that insight, but it's that middle layer that's really the crux of, asking those 5 whys, right? So I'd say, getting comfortable with, problem solving, asking those whys, right? Why is something done like that? I have a toddler at home and she's starting to get into that why phase, which I need to, just as a newer parent need to embrace, right? But for whatever reason, and it's probably because of parents, we get away from that, right? They have that inquisitive mindset of always, okay, why is it that way? Why is the sky blue? Why, those kind of things. So I'd say that is exceptionally important, right? That inquisitive mindset of being able to take a problem at its foundational, look at it at a foundational layer versus what's, very relevant to just what we see on the surface.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, these are critical skills in that it's, really, that's what we're seeing with these training programs and like you guys have implemented. It's not that hard to train someone in the data science skills to use the tools. It's really being able to, find the underlying insights. And sometimes that comes from, usually comes from things that aren't data science at all, right? Like you mentioned, someone who knows, maybe, military history. If you're working with the military, they're going to see things in that data that a data scientist who's not familiar with that might not. And along these lines, as far as engagement, bringing in another audience question here, we've talked a little bit about university engagement and so on. How would you see Accenture and your team engaging with Texas State and university settings, mutual opportunities that we can provide mutual benefit to each other?
Yeah, and I hate to harp on it, but it's, problem solving, right? Bringing in, again, I think just in general, my personal view, no one else, is that educational institutions, large institutions like Texas State and everyone else, they're always going to be a little bit behind, but I think that's okay. And I'm okay with that, right? Especially public institutions as a taxpayer, that's okay because if you're able to, provide the insight, the core foundational things like team building and team working in the teams, organizations like Accenture and all the big tech companies and all the, here in Texas, the resource companies and, manufacturing companies, it's their job to train their folks, right? Now, if anyone, I'm going to say something, but if anyone comes to you and says, hey, we want them to be trained day one, I just don't think that's possible because you, Texas State, are not going to change your curriculum for one organization. You want to, again, get folks the most broad experience as possible for them to understand what they want to do later on, right? So I'd say, the relationship that we have is great. We have, we hire a ton of alumni and graduates across, again, double stamp this as well, across the spectrum, right? So yeah, we have some data scientists, we have some CS folks. I know I work with the CSIQM folks quite a bit, but then also, on the liberal arts side, right? Very strong liberal arts program y'all have. So working with some of those, and some of those folks, are on my operations team, things like that. So I think providing that foundational layer for some of the things that we do, and then relying on us to then take it a step deeper into the specific technologies we want folks to be aligned with today, is kind of the ecosystem, if you will.
Mm-hmm. No, and along those lines of the broad spectrum, you mentioned so many things are being covered, and we have another great audience question here as far as, how is geography and GIS advancing activities that you guys are doing through data science, with resource allocation, logistics? I know you'd shown us when we've been over there a lot of different ways that you're using these tools to make advancements.
Yeah, I mean, geography is a big one, right? I mean, I'd say, so there's always pre-COVID and post-COVID. I think there's going to be a term for that one day. But, prior to COVID, the globalization was such a huge thing, right? It's the number one topic of conversation at places like Davos and things like that, right? Now with, post-COVID, I think it'll be shrunken a little, but I think then the national geography, the maybe regional geographies, right here, the South, the Midwest, the East and West, maybe I think there will be more of a reliance on that type of thing, where how do you as an organization deploy your resources, deploy your assets within that geography to help the different areas, of the country and even your state, right? A huge place like Texas. How are you able to quickly, again, predictively deploy your assets from a geography base is going to be exceptionally important, especially we talked about a little bit about, weather patterns and, the effects of climate change and things like that. So I think that's just going to exacerbate the extreme, things like that. So that brings in another level of geography that I don't want to touch.
No, but and it kind of that nicely also shifts gears to the role of faculty research and what Texas State is producing. In that, so we have relationships with data science, Fortune 50 companies, Fortune 500 companies, support from NIH, Department of Defense, National Science Foundation. When you guys are working with faculty, what are the kinds of things where they provide benefit to you, and that kind of back and forth relationship that you see?
Yeah, I think at a academic layer, right, we're going to see, and I don't think there one is the answer, right? So there's the academic and then the industry, whatever you want to call it, folks, that are more maybe a little bit closer. I think bringing those two together is the right and the sweet spot, right? So things that y'all are doing for the NIH, and then, grants from corporations and organizations, the largest ones in the world. Y'all are oftentimes a little bit ahead of the curve, if you will, from what you're able to do or what these organizations are wanting to do. And then folks like us have to come in and try and really help. But I don't think, again, you can rely on one or the other, right? If we don't, from an organization like us, if we don't have the insight into what we're seeing and what y'all are doing, then we're always just going to be fighting fires, right? We're always going to be on to the next big brush fire or whatever, versus trying to have a glimpse of the future and saying, okay, it might not be perfect here, but could we take some principles or underlying best practices from what has been written and published and implement it here or there, right? A great example of that is, agile development methodologies in the federal government. If you ask, I think technology directors in the federal government, maybe, 5 to 7 years ago, they'd be like, yeah, we're working on it. We're working on it, right? Now, if you look at surveys today and even maybe a year or two ago, everyone's agile, right? That just didn't happen because it happened. It's because they saw the benefits of it because of, research and development and publishings from the universities that said, this is actually the way to do it. This is what organizations like, the leading tech firms and Accenture are doing. Maybe you should get on board, right? So now they're all agile, right? However you want to describe that or define that. So it's just that comes to mind quickly on, especially again, federal government. I'm okay with the federal government being a little bit behind from a taxpayer perspective. Again, I don't want them to take these big swings on technology that hasn't been proven in the commercial sector. So that's definitely applicable to Agile as well.
Oh, no, I'm so glad you brought this up for a number of reasons. I mean, one is obviously credit to Accenture for really helping finding the sweet spot between not too much advancement, but also really bringing these things to places where they might normally be. But also from our perspective at Texas State, this is where we do find we provide a lot of complementary value in that, companies are often moving quarter to quarter and, like you said, putting out fires.
Yeah.
Whereas we're thinking about things that are coming in 10 or 20 years. And so to some degree, you guys rein us in into, how we can make impact now. But we find also that we can help, if you have problems that you might want to work on in 18 months or 24 months, both our research can address this, but also our students have found great value in kind of coming into corporate problems where they might want to be addressing these things, but they don't have the immediate resources to do it because they're moving right now for the next, end of year targets that they're trying to hit. And so I'm really glad that you highlighted that. That's something that served us really well. We feel like it served companies really well also.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'll double stamp on it that, we are often fighting fires. So without Texas State and other organizations looking to the future, right? I'm reminded of the quote that I think I forget, it might be Elon, who's, we often overestimate what we can do in a year, but underestimate what we can do in, say, 5 years or 10 years, right? So a year horizon is, and I think it's because of those fires and a global pandemic that we often, overestimate a year. But who knew? I think the iPhone just turned 10, right? So just things like that, how far we've come. If you said, everyone will have one or two of these things in their pocket at all times, 10 years ago, you'd probably get a few weird reactions, right? But it's actually true now, right? And it's probably true 5 years ago. So.
No, and to the point you've brought up about data being so much more available and in response to an audience question here, ethical issues in data science, as far as Palantir is really making a lot of headway as far as how do you balance both privacy and security at the same time. And I mean, you guys are involved in so many, really at the vanguard of this issue. What are the kinds of things that you see and where things might be going as far as data ownership, privacy versus help, and ways that you and Accenture are really being a leader in this way?
Yeah, and by no means am I expert here, so this is going to be Mainak's thoughts and speaking. And I'm, again, my view is very at the ground level, tactical, right? So I'd say we're really focused on things like who's accessing this data, right? Do they need to access it for the problem that they're working on or initiative that they're working on? What subset of that data, these huge swaths of data, right? The stats are pretty staggering that 90% of the data today was captured in the last 3 years, right? Unbelievable, right? And the other fun stat is that only 1% of that data has actually been analyzed, right? Analyzed to provide insights or something actionable, right? So you have these huge data sets. Who's accessing it, right? Are you giving someone the entire database or data set to access? Or is there a way to subset that or even start masking data, right? Because you don't need some PII information most of the time to understand a trend or an insight, right? The other one is why are they accessing it? Is there a reason for them to access it? Again, is PII needed in some of those instances? And the new one that we've always thought about, but a lot more prevalent is where are they accessing it from, right? Are they accessing it from their home network? Are they sitting at a Starbucks or sitting at a coffee shop? not anymore, but back in the day, are they doing a publicly available internet or connection? Are, so what, these are all the questions that we're working on and talking about at a very tactical level, granular level. And then, there's the questions about, that you mentioned about Palantir and all these organizations, about the data that they have on us. Is it our data? Who owns it? Who has the right to profit from it, right? These are all things that, that we as an organization are, providing our perspective on, that, we need to seriously think about. And I think it's actually something that every single individual on this call and outside your families, you should have that conversation. I know it's not the greatest dinner conversation, but it's, just to have that discussion. What do you think? Especially when you're signing these T's and C's right on the bottom of the website, that, the box is this big, but it scrolls for days. Are you truly understanding what you're signing up for and what you're allowing that organization or that company to do for the benefit that you're going to gain? Sometimes I've recently just done this, and I think I've had my first one or two that I've backed away from, honestly, just weighing that benefit of reading that, and then, okay, am I really going to get any benefit out of this random website that I'm signing up for? So.
Sure. I mean, yeah, even it's kind of something, 3 years ago, I might have said, whatever.
Yeah.
And now you might think twice about it, for sure. I mean, we've covered a whole lot of ground. I mean, with our data science initiative at Texas State, we're focusing on business, health, and society. And I mean, you guys are covering all this, and we've covered it, as well as student training as well, and where students fit in, from undergraduates, graduates, graduate students now, people who are, recent graduates, and even more distant graduates. Are there any final points you'd like to leave with our audience as we wrap up?
Good question. I would, I'm with the pandemic and quarantine, spent a lot more time with family and things like that, which is all great stuff, but it's also made me a little bit more introspective, retrospective. So I would say, for everyone on the line and whoever watches this, just be, grateful that and blessed that you are in a part of an organization, some way part, either an alumni or current student of a world-renowned institution like Texas State, right? Because not everyone gets those opportunities. So as a sub-bullet to that, take advantage of that, right? Take advantage of that opportunity, get involved. You'd never know, where an organization that you sign up for or a class that you sign up for will eventually lead you, right? It might lead you to an organization like Accenture. I was a finance accounting guy, grew up, my mom has spent 40 years on Wall Street, so I thought I was going to do that. But I happened to interview with Accenture because I like their core values and things like that. And 14 years later, I'm here, right? So you just never know. So just take all the opportunities, take advantage of the blessings that folks have had being part of an institution like Texas State, and get involved as much as possible, because that just opens doors, right? That just opens doors to things that we can't even know and spell, right? So.
Yeah. Well, and reciprocally, you guys have been really great to us. We've really appreciated the engagement, the opportunities you're providing for collaboration at the faculty level, at the student level, and it's really meant a lot to us, and we're looking forward to continuing that. So from there, I mean, we'll wrap it up, but we'll be in touch throughout time as well. And to the degree our audience members want to be in contact on Mainak, I'm sure we can provide contact for you as well. But thanks again for joining us. It's been great to connect again with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, everyone be safe. And Alex, I know we'll talk soon. And thanks everyone who put this on, and we'll see you out there.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it, Mainak. Thanks again.